I was born in Rochester, pretty much across southern Minnesota till my grandparents were in the southwestern part of the state. I've always lived in rural Minnesota. I've lived as far north as Grand Rapids and Brainerd, Moorhead, St. Cloud, Rochester. Been in this area for about 40 years, you know.
Yeah.
We've had a Northfield address for the last 20 years. So pretty much settled into this part of the state. I went to work for Jack Hyde at KDHL Radio in Faribault, you know, for a number of years. He wanted a hot air balloon rally. So what do you know about the hot air balloon rally? What do you want to know about the hot air balloon rally? So I was able to organize and start the first hot air balloon rally in the Faribault area. One year we tried to work it on the same weekend as the Jesse James Days because that would pull a lot of people into the area. Balloon rally was in the morning. Jesse James Days happened during the day. But that kind of overloaded the motels and what was available. It was only 1 year we did that. I think I only worked there for like 5 or 6 years. Jack sold the station, so I started my own company. It's on Target, A&M Inc. It's in Faribault now yet. My two sons run it.
Okay.
So that kind of let me get out and do what I wanted to do.
Yeah. What did you want to do?
I wasn't sure. I haven't decided yet either.
Lovely.
My husband says, squirrel, 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 you know, or go down a rabbit hole and find a whole village and never make it up again. You know, I can't really pinpoint what I wanted to do. I've always been an advocate for creativity. You know, no matter how that's applied, whether that's applied in business or whether it's applied in art, you know, I think everybody has an element of creative nature in them.
Did you consider yourself an artist growing up?
No, no.
Yeah.
And some days I don't know if I am or not.
Yeah.
I tend to be more of a researcher and a technician and a collaborator and a connector, and I've settled into more with fiber arts and organic natural dyes. That started when I was a kid. Dyes, there wasn't much available outside of the chemical dyes. And, you know, today I'm a pretty strong advocate. Why are you wearing fossil fuels? Because that's what chemical dyes are made out of. But when I was a small child, we lived in a farm. I ended up having dresses made out of feed sacks and, you know, various sundry things. And by the time I was in grade school, I decided I got to learn how to sew, you know. So I figured out how to do that myself. And along the way, I was able to develop enough skills that I taught anything people could wear. I had figured out how it was constructed and could teach people how to do that. I remember, though, was in, I don't know, 70s. I was teaching in Brainerd, and I was trying to convince one of my students that, you know, you are an artist. You're taking a two-dimensional piece of material, which is cloth, and making a three-dimensional sculpture out of it. You know, and I had difficulty with that. They kind of look at me like I didn't know what I was talking about. Well, today I've read about when did the curators start looking at fiber art as being an art form. It was always considered a craft, you know, a hobby type of thing. But it's only been in I'd say the last decade that fiber arts has taken a stronger stand in the world of art, and you see it curated into many museums around the world. My aunt got me into the corn detasseling team when I was 12, so then I figured out that, you know, gee, I can make some money, I can buy fabric, I can make my own clothes. Then I got a job at a drive-in, you know, they had those drive-in restaurant, working in the kitchen, you know, and just one thing led to another, and then I always figured, well, if I work, then I can make some money, and I could buy my own fabric. So that's been a long road. I started working with chemical dyes and doing a lot of dyeing and fiber arts and textile art type of things probably 15 years ago. I was fortunate to meet somebody by the name of Jane Dunewald, who has a sister living in Northfield, I understand. And she was just a phenomenal teacher, and I still track what she does today in the whole fiber art world. So I've been very fortunate with natural dyes. My mentor is Michel Garcia, who lives in France, and who I've been able to visit and work with him. So I've had the opportunity to work with people that I've really gained a lot of knowledge from. This is a sidebar, but when I was in radio, went to a workshop given by a gal by the name of Pam Lantos on marketing and media and so on and so forth. And the line that I came away from was, who cares? So how does that relate to what I'm doing? I've got to figure out the who cares. Yesterday I have work in the Southeastern Minnesota Visual Artists Gallery, and we have to work one period a month. And the guy I was working with, I brought up Murex. Well, he knew the whole story about Murex. He knew the biblical connections, he knew the Roman Empire and the connections and all around the Mediterranean. That doesn't happen often. So usually, some of the people at the textile center, there are some textile artists in the area, and there are artists in the area that are becoming more aware of, you can actually extract pigments from nature and add a medium to it and a binder to it and use it in your work. Julie Faulkner, I just mixed her up some acrylics with some indigo that I've grown, and she said it worked beautifully. So I'm going, okay, so let's see what other colors I can mix up for her work. Fred is, we're still going to get some Murex into his work. We just haven't succeeded with soft pastels. I've made a lot of watercolors. I'm fascinated with all the things you can do with the pigment. I can dye. That's one of the things that Michelle Garcia led me to, is I can dye with it in the dye pot, and come out with, I can come out with things like my scarf, but then there's still dye material left in the pot. When I was using chemical dyes, I had to throw it down the drain because you use soda ash to fix things. With natural dyes, that's not an option. You can extract the pigment out of the dye, and it ends up in a pigment powder over here, and then you can mix different binders with it, or you can leave it liquid and make an ink. So there's so many things that can be done with this little pot of dye material.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I get enthusiastic when I talk about it. But, you're listening. Thank you.
Well, it is interesting. It's really, really cool.
I've always been somewhat fascinated by indigo. Indigo is a vat dye, and it's got some chemical things going on, and you have to kind of understand it, get to know it. I asked my friend Michelle Garcia, can I grow indigo in zone 4? He said, sure, you can grow Japanese indigo. So then I find out where Roland Ricketts at. Roland Ricketts is known nationally and internationally as he trained in Japan for 10 years at growing indigo and dyeing with indigo, and he now is at the University of, he's in Bloomington, Indiana, at the university there. So I got seeds from him. Okay, where am I going to grow it? We don't have good soil. So I tried growing things that they don't grow well. So I contacted Steve down at Tweehoff Gardens. Sure, I can let you have some space. I didn't know anything about, I don't have green thumbs. My thumbs are really brown. And I tried growing down there a couple of years, and when it comes time to cut, the Japanese have sickles. So I just went out and started cutting with the scissors, and that's when my husband stepped in, and this is crazy. There's got to be another way of doing that. We raise now out at Silky Gardens. But I put together, first year out there, my husband and I, and then there was a plot near Nerstrand that let me plant some. And we planted over 2,000 indigo plants. I didn't know what I was doing. So I'm growing these 2,000 plants, and after the second cutting, my husband says, why don't you see if there's somebody that wants some indigo? I said, well, nobody around here is really that interested in it. But you get the word out. I had 2 people driving from near Rhinelander, Wisconsin, 4.5-hour drive, 2 times, and they filled up the back of their SUV with cut indigo, drove home as fast as they could get there, and hung it and dried it, and that's another side story. But anyway, that year there were people from Eau Claire that came, Rochester, St. Paul, that wanted fresh indigo. Then the next year there are people that saying, if you're going to do this again, we'd like to help out and be part of it. So thus formed the Rice County Indigo Growers Collective. And Paul at Silky Gardens said, always at the end of the year says, well, do you want 3 rows again next year, or 2 rows, or how many do you want? And we have water lines. you know, and he makes it really easy. Of course, he's got great strawberry beds up there, so everybody that comes they come and plant the plants, they come and do all the weeding. When we cut, they come and harvest, take it home and process. So that's how that all worked out. I've gotten into what's called tsukumo, which is a Japanese way of processing it, which is basically you dry the leaves, then you compost the leaves, then you let them sit for 6 months, and then you can make a vat, Japanese style vat. I have one of those going in my studio. I really like it. You get kind of there seems to be some living blue color in it. It's really deep. It's different than making a vat out of the traditional indigo powder. Well, I looked at they have this Bluff Country art tour. If they can have an art tour down along the Iowa-Minnesota border, we certainly have got enough artists along the 35W corridor in between Northfield, Faribault, and Owatonna that we can put together an art tour. And we did that. And there were artists that, you know, helped me out, like getting in Owatonna. You know, quite a few of the artists in Faribault I knew, and the artists in Northfield I knew. Fred Summers is the only one today that was on the original art tour that still is on the studio art tour. But people in Northfield that helped with that, like Jennifer Wolcott was a real asset. Leanne Stremka, who isn't living in Northfield anymore, but she was really helpful in helping get it organized. And of course, Tom, you know, was part of it at that time too. Evan was, I believe, a fifth-year student at Northfield, fifth-year art student. So, and I want to do, well, these kind of scarves. You wrap them on a PVC pipe. So Evan is turning the PVC pipe. I've got the silk on it, and then you got to use string and wrap. So my husband walks into the studio, and we're in the process of doing that. Tom said, for the amount of time that's taking, nobody's going to be able to afford to buy those scarves. You got to figure out something different. So he came up with a wood turning device that you just secure. Well, he always modifies things. He watches what I'm doing, and there's another way of doing that. So now I've got a wood turner, and I can put the PVC pipe in between them. And he had an old pottery foot piece, and so I just have to push on that, and it turns, and I just, you know, if I get it taped on, I just hold the string as it turns. So he does those kinds of things. I was doing, I had a grant, and I was doing a solo show with all dyed materials, and I said, I don't know what to call this. And he said, how about from garden to gallery? I went, oh, that's perfect, you know? So that's the kind of things, it goes back and forth. I'm trying to figure out a very, very old dye recipe for mixing buckthorn and cumin. And why do they call it Dutch pink? I don't know. I'll figure that out. But I said, I need a bunch of chalk. Oh, he goes to the studio and he brings me because he's got a pottery studio filled with the chemicals necessary to make all his own glazes. So there's not, you know, if I need some more soda ash, if I can't get it from another source, he's going up to the cities today to get more chalk and more soda ash, you know. So it's kind of a trade-off type of thing. I go in a lot of different directions. My undergraduate degree is in American Studies. My graduate degree is in liberal studies. You know, I didn't have to make up too many decisions. I got to study this broad spectrum. I say I'm a physicist in my heart, but in my soul I'm an artist. And my favorite artist is Leonardo da Vinci. Right behind him is probably Yo-Yo Ma, and then maybe Twyla Tharp, you know, and you just, so legacy, I'm not sure what that would be.
What's on the to-do list?
I think the only thing that I would have on a bucket list that I haven't done, see, I've had the opportunity, and I just take advantage of the situation. I've done a lot of awesome things, you know, awesome things like go skiing at the Montana Big Mountain, go scuba diving in the Caymans, you know. I started a hot air balloon rally, but then I got I'm a commercially licensed pilot, so I just got endorsements for hot air balloons, and we buy a hot air balloon and we fly it. I've not skydived.
Okay.
I've taken skydivers up in the hot air balloon and they've jumped out, which is real tricky. But I've never skydived, and I still think I'd like to do that. Or I know what I could do. I can go out to gliding. You know, they've got that out at just down the road off of 19. I could do that. That would be fun. So it has more to do with the air. You know, I used to love to ride motorcycles in the country, you know, because you get that warm summer air just blowing on your face. So it seems to be about motion and air what I haven't done. You know, I'd like to go back to Japan and take a class over there. I'd like to go to France and work with my mentor in his studio, his lab. So I think anything that's really, that I could say, okay, I want to do this and do it, would be go out and do gliding. Well, I started that adventure when I was going to St. Cloud State because they had an aero club. You know, when I took my flight training, I paid for an airplane and an instructor. It was $5 an hour. I mean, now I can't even imagine how much it is. And I flew. See, I think way back when, they had a flying club out at the Farewell Airport, and for a couple of years I flew out of there. But otherwise, you know, I flew for an insurance company. Yeah. You know, when I was hot air ballooning, you know, I did give some lessons, and I was certified to do that. But most of the flying that I've done was probably more around central Minnesota. Actually, the thing I enjoyed, I think, the most with flying is night flying. A clear night, crystal night, because you can see forever. You can see the lights, and I have a pretty good sense of direction. So you can see the lights way out. Oh, that's Fargo, you know. So I just found night flying really, really fascinating. It was about 10, 15 years there I flew a lot. I probably have 1,000 hours. So I did a lot of flying.
Yeah, very cool.
But, you know, and off the subject of textiles, but I've always done that, and that's always led to another aspect of something, yeah. And which I think is fascinating. Like my husband says, squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. You know, I've done some classes at 50 North, you know, and it's just kind of fun to watch the surprised look on people's faces. Like, hey, let's make some ink out of buckthorn berries. What? You know, and then when they make the ink and then they spread it on the paper, they're well, what else can we do? You know, so it's kind of fun to see people explore, you know, yeah. Come out of themselves.
So you said all this, and you're not done with projects,
no.
And yet, as we stand today, from my view, you've done about 30 different careers, and you've done enough to fill several lifetimes, and you're still skeptical about being the living treasure.
Well, why am I here? Yeah, well, you know, there are some really phenomenal artists, and some people have really contributed to the arts in this region. You know, a pitch for CMAC, Southeastern Minnesota Arts Council, is they have a new director there. Mm-hmm. I met her when she was over at the Phipps. And she worked there for like 15 years as in charge of visual arts and gallery and so on and so forth. My husband, Tom, had an exhibition over there. He's a potter. She's now the director of Southeastern Minnesota Arts Council. She's been out and visited Northfield. She knew that I was a living treasure before I did, I think, because she just happened to be sitting at a meeting somewhere. And but so this region has got a person that's absolutely phenomenal in charge of the arts, and I think $500,000 are getting, you know, through the legacy fund. So there's a lot of. She said there was about 80 individuals the last time that applied for individual grants. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of work for the staff, but that's exciting. When I was on, I'd get some state arts boards grants. I'd be on a panel. I'd always check the state arts board, who had gotten grants and where they were from. And there was only about 19% of the individual artists awarded that got grants in outstate Minnesota. Previous to that, they did this big statewide survey, and they knew that about 49% of the visual artists in the state of Minnesota lived in outstate Minnesota. So why is only 19% getting grants? you know, people would like to say, well, it's maybe probably because there's better artists in the metro, yada, yada, yada. My contention was, no, they don't know about them. The regional arts councils need to do a better job of not talking about just the grants they have available, but what's also available at the state level. And I guess at the state level, they've almost doubled the amount of grants today. But, you know, that kind of stuff excites me.
Absolutely, absolutely.